All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's Wednesday, May 12th, and this is a meeting of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. And we're taking up two items today. The first is Bill 1021, which is legislation to addressing the county's economic development strategic plan. And then the second is Executive Regulation 421 on the obligations of landlords in relation to air conditioning. And we are joined today by the executive leadership of MCEDC, and I will turn it to my colleague, Andrew Friezan, who introduced this legislation in a moment to share any thoughts that he would like to share as we begin. I just want to express my appreciation to him for coming up with this new approach. A number of years ago, as I've mentioned, I introduced legislation with Councilmember Roger Berliner that sought to require the county executive to create an economic development strategic plan, which under the really adept leadership of Lily Chi, former executive assistant and current state delegate, we crafted a plan in partnership with a lot of private sector leadership. And to me, the objective was really to get out of the circular firing squad and to bring the county government and the private sector together to craft a vision and then start working together. And I think it had a lot of positive benefits and outcomes. And it wasn't long after we took on that job and prepared that document that we started delving into the Amazon competition, which was actually a very similar kind of process or function where the county's government and private sector leaders work together closely, on a shared vision, and I thought in a very productive and successful way. And in the meantime, when I first introduced the legislation with Councilmember Berliner, there was no MCEDC. We had talked about creating a public-private economic development entity, but we hadn't done that. And so now MCEDC has several years under its belt and is making a lot of progress. So Councilmember Friezan has come forward with this idea of reassigning this function, which I think I'm very enthusiastic about. I think that, it has been a highlight. MCEDC's work on strategic issues in the economic development have been unifying and help the council and the executive branch work together. And so I think by continuing this and kind of being the entity that would hold this and continue to evolve it and turn it into a evolving process or an evolving plan as opposed to kind of it wasn't a one and done previously. It's supposed to be updated every 4 years, I think. But I think the vision here is something that's a little bit more practical or, not necessarily as extensive, more nimble, more useful. I'll say it that way, more useful. So just on that basis, I think it's a wise way to come after this again and get some traction. So appreciate Councilmember Navarro as well and her work putting forward the economic development platform. And I know we're seeking to have that framework evolve as well through this effort. So of that, I'll turn it to Councilmember Friezan for comments, committee members, and Councilmember Navarro if she wishes to as well.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I will say that all I have tried to do here is be a facilitator and to try to take all of the different efforts that were happening and to try to move it into a unified and coordinated place and to institutionalize it as part of our process. So I really appreciate your leadership, Chair Reamer and Councilmember Navarro, particularly when she was council president, and the work that she did in moving these issues forward, and the executive branch. We work very closely with Mr. Fletcher and with CAO Madalino and with the county executive. I worked directly and closely on thinking through how this was going to work and how we were going to make sure that all of the positive work that is happening right now in the county is coordinated and is consolidated and can be found in one place so that we're speaking with one voice as one Montgomery County when we're speaking to our business community, when we're speaking to our residents, when we're speaking to the region, to the country, and to the world. And I really do think, in many ways at a local government level, this is our foreign policy, so to speak, economic development, and we have to be speaking with one voice when we're talking about foreign policy. There isn't a lot of room for us all to be working off a different song sheet, so to speak, and be heading in a lot of different directions. And I do think there's a lot of terrific work that has happened, but we're not always as good as the sum of our parts because we haven't consolidated it all into one place. And I think this helps to put everybody on the same page, and it also helps to solidify MCEDC's role as the economic development entity that we have designated. And I think this allows the organization to take itself to the next level, which has always been and continues to be the goal that I know the organization has for itself and that we have for the organization. And so I really do think that this builds on that. It allows us to do more proactive outreach so that we're not starting in county government to develop these plans. We're starting in the business community, soliciting and engaging their ideas so they're not reacting to what we're telling them should be our economic development strategy. We are responding to their interests because, ultimately in county government, we should be nimble enough to move to where our economy is going and to capture as much benefit for our residents as we can, as opposed to trying to dictate to the business community where it ought to go. So I think this really sets the framework. It creates a formalized process. It allows us to assume our appropriate roles as part of economic development, and it does so in a way that allows us to do it all together in a collaborated and coordinated fashion. I really appreciate all the work that MCEDC has put into this and their commitment to following through on this effort, and look forward to bringing this to a conclusion and allowing it to be put into practice. I will say the basic idea here, we'll go through the actual bill, is that there is a 4-year cycle with a 2-year update, allowing for enough time to actually implement meaningful things, but to allow for time for updates to occur in a transparent and accountable manner, and to keep it relevant to what the priorities and the interests and the issues are. It starts with MCEDC. It then allows for the county executive to provide formal input, and then ultimately has to be approved by the council. So everybody assumes their various roles. It will go to a final timeline later on, which will have a July process and a fall review. But for the transition period, it will start a little bit later than that. Obviously, we're starting this later than what would be appropriate and applicable for July timeline. And we are going to take up an amendment working with the executive branch and with MCEDC based on our timing. And now we're going to slightly adjust those timelines as well. And then I will say that the executive branch has raised a number of issues that they were hoping would be a part of this. We've already addressed those as part of the economic development platform that Councilmember Navarro led the effort on some of the issues that the executive branch wanted raised. So I hope that we can just clarify that today as well, because I think we've addressed and taken into consideration those issues as well. So appreciate everybody's work here. I think this is the start of a lot of positive work, and I just wanted to note in particular council members Reamer and Navarro that this really is building on a lot of the work that they have done previously, that we're just taking the natural next step for. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Tawanda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate my colleague, Councilmember Friezan. We were just dividing and conquering the work before you showed up about who would lead on which issue, but he certainly has taken the leadership role on this along with colleagues. And one of the great things about having a bill that already has 5 co-sponsors is that it's going to pass. So, so I think we're all about the work now of making sure everyone understands what the responsibilities are and how it can be most effective. And I certainly agree that it makes sense to have the economic development strategy convened and coalesced and pulled together with the input from all the appropriate sides, the executive branch, council, the folks that are in our economy and make up our economic development system, the businesses, the employers, the employees, and get that input and put a plan together and drive that plan. I also think that delegating that authority, or kind of transferring that authority and responsibility to the EDC also makes sense. We want to make sure that as this transition happens, that they have the requisite, kind of appropriate expertise and input, and I will have to deal with what the format is and all that can be worked out as through the implementation process. But one question I did have, just for I guess for our staff, I was thinking that when I saw that this was scheduled during the budget season, the consideration of this bill, I wondered why we weren't also considering the transparency bill related to the EDC that I think many of us are co-sponsors of. I think, as we are putting more responsibility, and this is a discussion we had earlier related to EDC, as we're putting more responsibility onto the corporation, that raises the bar even more for the need for the transparency from the public. So I guess that might be a question to the chairman. I was surprised.
Thanks for the question. I've talked to Councilmember Glass as well, and was going to share as we got into the discussion that we, of course, are going to be scheduling our follow-up on that bill at PHED very soon. I would guess we'll do it in June. So it's coming soon.
Okay. I appreciate that. I just think it's important to tie those things together closely, as we work and give more authority here. Okay. And then to Mr. Fletcher, just a question, and maybe it's Mr. Fletcher and Mr. Wu. How do you envision this? It might be Mr. Wu, whoever's most appropriate. Will you bring on a consultant to the EDC to help you, or are you going to have the in-house capacity, or how do you envision doing this? I know that the executive the staff, I think, had worked with consultants. So how are you envisioning that at this early stage of, or not really early stages, Councilmember Friedman said we're kind of in mid-cycle here, but how do you envision that working?
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to answer that question now?
Yeah, I mean, we were maybe if my colleague would.
Yeah, I can defer that question.
Yeah, we'll go into the bill and the requirements, and we'll have dialogue. I wanted to give Councilmember Navarro a chance to share some comments before we kind of got into the text of the legislation. So I'm
happy to hold on that, but okay. I did want to make the general comment about the transparency bill, so I appreciate that, and I'll hold on the other question.
Okay, great. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the PHED committee, in particular Councilmember Friezan, for working collaboratively to introduce this bill. I just wanted to, reflect on the year 2019, which was a year of a lot of changes and a lot of transitions, and it was there was such robust and such energy around what was next for our county. Throughout the campaign cycle, the issue of economic development was always front and center, because it is obvious, and I've always said that, unless we do have a very aggressive and robust economic development strategy that we can execute, we will continue to have issues having the necessary revenue to address the issues that we all are so interested in, especially the most vulnerable. And one thing that kept, there was a theme, and it was this notion of what exactly is the framework. what is the strategic vision? What is that elevator speech? It was almost as if we needed to figure out and redefine our identity in this space. And in so many conversations with folks in the private sector, with community organization leaders, et cetera, this just became an ongoing theme throughout. And so the work that I led with all of you, and of course with folks, stakeholders. I know Mr. Tompkins was present in those meetings where I convened a real cross-section of our private sector, and then also convened a cross-section of our nonprofit organization leadership, as well as met with a lot of just community members just to gauge what are those areas when you think about Montgomery County vis-a-vis economic development and recognizing our assets? Because the issue of narrative is so important, and how we redefine our narrative and how we articulate that is really critical. I've seen it, and I've shared this with all of you, very much so, especially in terms of our region, how other jurisdictions have really found a sweet spot in terms of how they define and how they communicate their particular narrative. And so the economic development platform was just real high level framework, something that could literally fit in one page, and that everybody could say, this is the high level strategy, and this is how we're going to execute it. Unfortunately, I think that 2020 came with all of its extraordinary challenges, and we never really got to the nitty gritty of how to execute. And folks kept asking me from the private sector, whatever happened, the idea was the committees would report out on the work that they were doing, populate each of those quadrants: transportation, business development, workforce development, and housing. And that there would be a set of principles that would, guide that particular work. So I really appreciate Councilmember Friezan coming up with this vehicle that does not just, dismiss this work that we all decided to support, because that has been part of the criticism, right? Is that, you have all these efforts with all of these different plans and all of these different things, and then boom, they change all the time. And that, I think, feeds into this notion that people scratch their heads and wonder, what is Montgomery County's actual framework? What is the vision? Where are we going? We also do a lot of work in these different spaces, but are they aligned with that vision? Because how in the world are we going to really measure our success if we're not aligning our work with these very important goals? So I'm really pleased that there is now this particular vehicle through the Economic Development Corporation to own this, and to be able to then, in working in collaboration with the administration, the county council, et cetera, the private sector stakeholders, that we can all then be held accountable. I think it's the only way that we're going to be able to get a handle of what seems kind of like a piecemeal situation. I believe this will ground it, and hopefully we'll begin to get a different reaction to what Montgomery County stands for vis-a-vis economic development. Where are the opportunities? And we can all sing from the same sheet in terms of how are we framing, how are we sharing, how are we leveraging the many assets that we have, because we are so fortunate. And this could not be happening at a better moment, this bill, because as we now are looking into post-COVID-19 recovery, there is a plethora of opportunities to totally redefine and take advantage of many of the things that we have learned, and really boost this notion of economic development for the county. We have no choice, actually. So I think this is a great time, it's a great moment, and I just couldn't be happier that this will provide that vehicle so that we can actually do the work and not just, let it sit somewhere and then, in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, we're wondering whatever happened to all of these documents. So I look forward to hearing a little bit about how, will be implemented. But again, I appreciate the PHED committee for the leadership in the space. I think it has been noted that this is a council that has really taken the reins of economic development in a lot of different areas. And I think that's appropriate. Perhaps we should have done that a little bit more before. But I think that it brings a lot more energy into this space. And for that, I think we're better. So again, thank you so much. And to Mr. Wu, thank you so much for everything that you are doing. And I have no doubt that this will be something that we can definitely celebrate in terms of some outcomes.
Terrific. All right. So, Bob, if you'll walk us through the packet, and then we'll hold the first question for Councilmember Jawando.
Sure. The bill, as we've already heard, it starts with historically in 2015 when the county reorganized, eliminated the Department of Economic Development, and designated the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation to be the county's economic development entity. And at the time, though, the obligation to produce a strategic plan remained with the county executive. What this bill would do would be to transfer the obligation or the responsibility of creating at least the initial draft of the economic development strategic plan for the county to the EDC. They will then send it to the executive, who will then have the opportunity to add comments and make suggestions and recommendations, and ultimately it'll go to the council for final approval. The testimony at the public hearing was favorable. The county executive supported it with some suggested amendments, which I'll discuss in a minute, and the same with the other two speakers from the Chambers of Commerce and the Coalition for Smarter Growth also supported the bill. The first issue I wanted to discuss was the fiscal and economic impact of the bill. Obviously, the hope is the economic impact will be positive. That's the conclusion of OLO. The fiscal impact is, in my estimation, a little bit incomplete. It essentially says that from the executive branch, this responsibility that I no longer have as the originator and now just as a commentator is not going to cost them any money. They won't have to have any additional resources. But as Councilmember Jawando asked, it may require EDC to have additional resources, or it may not. They may already have enough resources to handle this, but that really wasn't covered in the impact statement, the fiscal impact statement. So that is a question that the committee may want to look into. The second point in the issue is a twofold question. Should the bill require EDC to consider racial equity and climate change? The answer to that is easy. That's yes, of course. The second question, which is really in front of the committee, is should the bill be amended to expressly require EDC to consider racial equity and climate change? And I will point out the bill does include, as Councilmember Navarro pointed out, that the contents of the plan must be consistent with the Council's Economic Development Platform, which was approved in Resolution 19300. That platform includes the requirement that the Council, the four-pillar economic development platform that's in that resolution that Ms. Navarro discussed, includes a racial equity and social justice and environmental sustainability as two of the four desired outcomes that the plan must consider. So I think it's already in there. but if you wanted to add it as one of the factors that must be considered, you can do that as well. And if you look on page 3 of the packet, I've produced a alternative amendment that would do that. Add racial equity and social justice and environmental sustainability, including climate change. I don't think you can really, in 2021, talk about environmental sustainability without including climate change. I don't know if you really need to say that. But those are the two issues that are brought up in the packet. And back to the chair.
Okay. All right. Councilor Tawanda, you were going to ask MCD, ask what you would like to ask.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm probably going to get a better answer because they've had a lot of prep time here to think about it. So I should do that more often. Just to restate, supportive of moving the function. I appreciate Councilmember Navarro's comments and Councilmember Friesen's comments about this. If
Nobody
you could
appreciates my comments. I'm really so used to that, I got to say. Okay, keep going.
I appreciate your comments as well, Mr. Chairman. Just would love to know what the plan is right now. Assuming this will pass, how will you implement it? How will you bring on consultants? Do you have the expertise? Or you can plan to hire staff? What's the plan? We're considering the budget right now, obviously, so it ties into all of that.
Well, thank you, Council Member, for asking the question. But before I respond directly to that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you and the PHED committee members for holding today's hearing. And thank you also to Council Member Navarro for joining us today. And we especially want to express our appreciation to Council Member Friezan, the sponsor of Bill 1021, for his courtesy in soliciting MCDC input prior to the bill's introduction, for his willingness to be accommodating to our suggestions, and also for seeking to address issues that we have raised. And we look forward to a constructive discussion with the PHED committee on this bill. And if MCDC is tasked with this responsibility, we want to make sure that the work product is as strong as possible. We want to create the comprehensive economic strategy for Montgomery County, not just as a government document, but as a public-private entity. MCDC would be seeking to ensure that there's a consensus on how our county can recover from this pandemic, because as you all know, we need to all work together to get to the other side of this pandemic crisis with its resulting economic devastation. That means making sure that it's not just the government, but also industry playing a very significant role in making sure that we have as strong an economic recovery as possible. That means being able to help drive business-led solutions, being able to take a look at past strategies and activities, including a number of the task forces that were established by the County Executive for Economic Recovery. And we really must align everybody in a consensus strategy so that we can all march forward in unison towards a stronger economic future for Montgomery County. And so that would be the overriding goal and purpose if we are tasked with this responsibility. And to respond back to Councilmember Jawando's question directly, how we do this is, quite frankly, we're still deliberating the best process to do that. Of course, as the council views our FY22 budget and what the council does, will have an impact in our ability to prioritize this as strongly as we believe it should be prioritized. We have, however, come to the belief that we will not be outsourcing this document and this exercise. I know that in past economic strategies, there has been a substantial outsourced solicitation for a consultant. We believe that if we're going to make this as impactful as it needs to be, that we need to control most of the elements in-house, and also to be able to take activities and not just that we've done most recently, but also past strategies, and have that be able to feed into a comprehensive strategy to show also how we can move forward, and also be able to glean lessons learned from this. As far as enhancing our staff with additional FTEs to be able to focus on this issue, at this point, we're uncertain. We're open to that possibility, but a lot depends on our FY22 budget appropriation by the council. And as we move forward in strategizing, if we're tasked with this responsibility to determine how best we can approach this. But we want to make sure that irrespective of whether or not we end up bringing in a consultant to help package, format, or provide some data assistance, we want to make sure that this is a product that comes out of MCDC in-house, and that we are able to build off of past strategies, and also to make this as inclusive as possible, this process, so that we can achieve that consensus document, that strategy that we're all looking forward to, so that we can march in unison together, so everybody understands where the economic development priorities for the county should be.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I think, it's going to be important that we all stay in close touch in this. One of the best things about this is I think it places an important role at every step in the process of developing this strategy. But obviously primary role with the Economic Development Corporation and you and your staff, Mr. Wu. And so I think just as you're developing this out, but since this will be new, stay in touch with us on this. I personally am glad to hear that you're going to do it mostly in-house. I think that is important. And obviously, graphic artists and designers and things, aside, but I think the meat of it should be. And I think all too often sometimes with these things, we get something done, and having been a consultant myself in the past, certainly not against consultants, but the old joke is they take your watch, you give them your watch, and then you ask them what time it is, and they tell you what time it is on your watch, and they hand you back your watch. And so I think we want to make sure that this is a meaningful process, and that it can actually be implemented with fidelity, and that everyone's involved in it. So I think that I'm glad to hear that, and look forward to as you flesh it out a little more. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Friezan.
Good news is I don't wear a watch, so that's good. No, I appreciate that. I will say, the county in the undertaking that had happened previously did hire a consultant and paid a considerable sum of money to do it. I actually think this, could ultimately save money by streamlining this process to an entity that has core competency already and will just be complementing the existing core competency that it has, recognizing that when that initial effort happened and now Delegate Chi was in charge of it, we didn't have this entity the way that we do now. So it's not a criticism, it's just a reflection of the new reality that we're in, that I think that there's a benefit here. So I really do appreciate the points and the comments that Councilor Member Joanno just made. It seems to me that the one decision point, it was emailed around, is referred to as Friezan Amendment 1. This is just a slight tweak to the timing, as I noted in my preparatory remarks. This is something that has been discussed with the executive branch and with MCEDC, just reflecting the timeline now and when we expect the bill to be addressed. It is not related to the ongoing timing of when these reports will be expected in that time frame, but it will address the transition, the first report. Initially, we were planning on having the first report drafted by December 1st, sent to the county executive, and then the county executive reviewing it and submitting to the council formal comments by January 15th of next year. We decided to adjust that upward slightly, December 31st, to allow for an extra month for MCEDC, just given the timeline that we currently have to come up with the initial draft, and then shift the county executive's timeline 2 weeks to January 31st of 2022. It takes the holidays out from when the county executive was going to be reviewing, and then it will keep the council's timeline longer. The council takes longer to do its work since we're a 9-member body and have other considerations and processes. So I think this keeps us on schedule to what we were hoping to do, but allows for more time to get the type of work product that we would expect, and still allows for the executive branches we've confirmed that I see a nod by Mr. Fletcher to do its work and to participate in the process as we hope and expect and know will occur. So I don't know if it's appropriate now, Mr. Chair, to put that amendment forward for consideration, but it's a consensus, or if we could just do it without objection.
Take it as a motion not requiring a second, and I'll put it forward without objection. All right, and great. Councilmember Navarro wanted to speak. Councilmember Joando, following Councilmember Navarro. Did you have anything else on this item, Councilmember Friezan?
No, that's it. I just wanted to note that and appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. So just one clarifying question. So it was envisioned when we adopted the economic development platform that committees, council committees that take up some significant components that lead to, of course, our desired state for economic development, would it have opportunities to report out, if you will, almost, a way to check in to see, okay, how have we advanced? So for example, let's just take housing, right? So the work that the PHED committee has done in the space of housing, whether, it was the issue around the WMATA properties, or whether it had to do, let's just say, ADUs, or just in general what we did with the growth policy and infrastructure policy, that we could then basically be able to continually check in and take a step back and say, this is moving the needle for us. How would this bill envision that piece? Because I see that there will be input from, of course, the executive, the council, et cetera, in terms of the strategic plan. But then how would we be able to kind of check in to see how particular decisions around land use or legislation, or if the executive, for example, is proposing something, what would be the mechanism to make sure that we are aligning all of those particular decisions with the desired goal? So that's number one. And then number two, I hope the committee will consider adding the piece around racial equity and social justice and environmental sustainability to this. It was folded into the desired state for economic development, considering who we are in the county. So just offer that as I don't know if the committee was going to take that on, but in terms of how to do sort of those check-ins, accountability piece around also the role that the council plays and the executive plays in promoting economic development, or basically somehow standing in the way of economic development, right? It can go either way. How would that be operationalized? Or would that be a separate sort of piece?
And take a shot at that if you want.
Sure, Bob.
Bill, the bill doesn't talk about committee's review. It talks about council approval, but it would be up to the council president to send it to committee. I mean, it would be similar in a lot of ways to it used to be the SSP, I guess, the infrastructure and growth plan. I mean, that goes to committee before it ends up at the council. And it would be certainly appropriate to have this go to individual committees to talk about subjects that are within their jurisdiction, and then ultimately go to full council for approval. I mean, that would be a normal way to do it. Forgetting the transition period, the time period is September 1st, the executive's comments, and December 1st would be council approval. So the council would have the fall, essentially, to go to committee and make decisions on the economic development strategic plan. So I think that's probably how it would go. But the bill is silent on that. I mean, we don't have any legislation that requires anything to go to committee.
Let's hear what the sponsor is.
Can I clarify something? So I guess what I'm trying to say, and I didn't come prepared to offer anything. What I'm trying to say, I'm not necessarily saying that, you know, in terms of requirement to go into committee, what I'm saying is that as we make decisions almost on a daily basis that can definitely enhance our economic development goals, or they could work against them, a mechanism to do a check-in, or to even just have an opportunity to say, you know, mid-year, these are some of the decisions that we made, and look, we moved the needle on this particular piece. I find that is something that is missing just in general. And I don't know if, you know, maybe it's in the regulation, I don't know, but it seems to me like that's incomplete, because sure, we can have a strategic plan, but, you know, given that the council plays such a pivotal role in things like land use and appropriations and things like that, if there isn't a way for there to be a check-in moment to see how we're doing, you know, it's just, I feel like that piece of accountability is somehow missing. But, you know, I didn't come prepared with anything to offer about that.
Okay, let's hear from Councilmember Friezan.
Yeah, I appreciate Councilmember Navarro's points here. I think there's two aspects to it. I think what Mr. Drummer, you're discussing is the approval of the plan itself, and there is a formal council role to the approval of the plan itself. There's also then the going back to the plan and saying, okay, you know, it's the, you know, Jerry Seinfeld reservation issue. You know, it's one thing to take the reservation, but the key is really to hold the reservation. That is the whole point and purpose of the reservation. It doesn't really matter if you show up to the rental car location, they don't have the car that you requested. And so the whole point is not just to establish a plan, but it's to execute a plan. And we're judged not by what we say we want to do, we're judged by what we actually accomplish. And so I take that point to heart. You know, I think that's how we use this plan. I mean, to me, you know, that is the whole interest, the whole idea, you know, behind it. You know, I think that we have the council's role in the actual approval of the plan itself, and then, you know, we then hold ourselves to it. One of the reasons why we set it up the way that we did with a 4-year process with a 2-year update was so that it remained relevant. We force ourselves, you know, the idea of that 2-year update is both to assess where we are in terms of what we set out to do, and to you know, tweak it to ensure that it remains you know, relevant as well. So, you know, I think there's two aspects to that. I think that this should be part of you know, the council's focus. I think that it will be. I think making this change will you know, we'll push it to that level. And I think in the work that we do, we will have what the council has recently approved to fall back on, you know, in terms of that. So, you know, I totally agree with it. I do think it's part of the whole rationale and purpose behind it. I'm not sure that it needs to be amended in terms of accomplishing that. I think that we're set up to do that, but I think that it's a key point and something that we're going to have to continue to hold ourselves accountable towards.
I slightly disagree, but again, I didn't have anything to propose. I honestly feel like, you know, leaving it up to the council making the decision to just kind of holding ourselves accountable, it's a little wishy-washy to me. I wish that we could incorporate some type of, you know, even if it's an ad hoc committee on strategic planning or something like that, that would do a check-in to see. Ultimately, this plan is, you know, there will be a big part of this that rests on the council's and the executive's actions, along, of course, with our partners. And so, you know, having some way to structurally do a check-in, to me, really holds people accountable. But again, I didn't come prepared with anything. in particular.
Thank you. I mean, the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee will certainly take up the Economic Development Strategic Plan that comes forward, and we'll work on it over time. I think that it's a vision and guidance exercise, and hopefully, provides council members and the county executive with fruitful ways to focus their energy. Certainly won't mean that these are the only things that council members do, or a county executive will still have their own ideas. I mean, that's the nature of things, and I'm sure because it'll be a collaborative process, the MCEDC, the county executive, county council will share ideas and develop things together. And then, if people are invested in those ideas, then hopefully they'll be working to move them forward, and there'll be elements of it that MCEDC is saying, we've got strategic programs. We're seeking your support at the council for funding those programs, and here's how it ties into a broader vision. And so we would certainly continue to work with MCEDC and the executive branch on how that is carried out. Important point there. Councilmember Giwando, I think you had raised your hand.
Yes, just on that point, I do think we should think about what is council approval. I had assumed when I read that it would come to our committee,
Right,
and that the full council would then consider it as well.
Thank you. I got sidetracked there as well. Remind us, what is in this bill for council review of the plan? What's the timeline of that? And is there, I think Bobby said there isn't a required council approval in the legislation. Let's hear from the sponsor what his idea is. And
well, if I just to finish the point, I think there should be. I read it that there would be formal approval. To Councilmember Navarro's point, I do think it makes sense to have a formal approval input and approval process. So I don't, there's always do you put that in the legislation specifically, or is it worked out outside? That I think is a matter of kind of preference, but I do think it's an important enough document that, like we do now, there should be review of the committee and then a process to have a full council participation. So yeah, but I would like to hear the answer to your question that you just asked.
My question, which was my paraphrasing of your question. So let's hear.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Let's hear what. Again, we'll go to the bill sponsor and MCEDC for their comments on this question of approvals and timelines and so forth.
So yeah, I mean, it goes through the county. Mr. Drummer mentioned similar to the SSP, but it's not the SSP, I will say, or the growth and infrastructure policy, but it goes to the council, and what your assumption and the way that you were operating under Councilmember Giwando is the way that the bill is written.
Right. Okay.
Is there adopted? I think the question is, after it's been adopted, I think is what Councilmember Navarro was raising. Do we go back to it? I'm not sure it's necessary, but I don't know that it would be a huge problem if we wanted to add, a provision to say that the PHED committee would do an annual review, or twice a year, review of the council's efforts. I mean, I would certainly be perfectly comfortable with that. That would be like an update every year. So basically, it's set up now. Every 4 years is the full plan, which it coincides with the council term. That's similar to the strategic plan as currently is enshrined into county law, that doesn't exactly follow the timeline or hasn't in recent years. Every 2 years, every other year, there's an update to it. So there, it could be as many or as few changes. The idea being, we don't want to change our entire economic development strategy every year, every 2 years. But we want to be in a position to keep it relevant and to make the appropriate adjustments. And so that's why we set up that process. And if we wanted to add, and every year we would do a status check, a review, and have the PHED committee review it. I think that's the in contention that Councilmember Navarro is suggesting. My sense is that's what the Fed committee should be doing. And I think Councilmember Navarro's point is we don't always do what we intend to do. So that would, put into the legislation something specific. And turn to Councilmember Navarro if that would reflect what she's suggesting. But if that's the suggestion, then I would be, perfectly comfortable with adding an annual review, of the plan by the Fed committee.
Right. So exactly. So what I'm saying is that, once the plan is adopted, look, there might be some significant actions by the council along with the executive, let's say on transportation, right? There might be a significant action on workforce development strategy or an initiative or something like that. And it seems to me that it's almost like, you need to have this feedback loop, right? That you have a plan, the plan is a live document, and then there's opportunity for the council, along with the executive to do a check-in to see, what have we done that's been significant in these so-called areas that we have included in this bill to guide the development of this plan. If we acknowledge that housing, transportation, economic, workforce development, business development, that those are really important critical pieces, right? Number of jobs and things like that. When we make significant decisions on behalf of our taxpayers, there should be a way to loop that back to understand how is that staying true to this economic development plan, strategic plan, so that there isn't a disconnect. That's what I hear all the time, right? Is because there's a need to make sure that our constituents understand that when we are making those decisions, that there is logic to that. That when we talk about, more housing and activity centers, this is not just something we came up with, that it's enshrined in our economic development strategic plan, and we are actually doing something about it. And so that's all I'm saying, is that there should be a mechanism through which we're able to assess how we're doing. How are we helping move that needle forward? Or have we made a whole bunch of decisions that actually are are getting in the way of moving towards those goals? That's the piece that I just feel like it's missing. And I don't think it's a hard thing to do, right? I mean, I think it could either be, an opportunity for relevant committees to do a check-in, and then there's like a report that is shared with, the council, or is shared widely, so that we continue to assess our incremental progress towards this extraordinary big goals. So that's the only piece, again, that I'm just wondering how we close that loop.
Could I suggest, I think now I understand what Councilmember Navarro is saying. I think I misunderstood her point originally, but there's an old acronym that I've heard over the years for strategic plans called SPOTS. Strategic plan on the shelf. It's like you have a plan, but you don't follow it. I would think that the appropriate organization to report on how it's going would be EDC, really. Reporting to the council, not a council committee reporting on how the council did. The council presumably is, if you have a strategic plan, I don't know that you need to put in law, you should make your economic development decisions consistent with that plan. I mean, that's the whole point of the plan. But it might make more sense to have, and you could pick the time frame, quarterly, annually, semi-annual reports from EDC on how are we doing? How is the executive and the council doing in their decisions, implementing it, and how is it working? That makes more sense to me than requiring a council committee to make judgments on how they're doing. And
I mean, that would be fine as long as there is an opportunity for the feedback loop. I wasn't necessarily proposing that the committees would kind of pass judgment on how we're doing, but I feel like there should just be some type of mechanism through which we all can have a robust conversation about how we're all playing a role and how we're doing in general. So, something like that would be fine. I think it would be useful.
Could we hear, thanks. Could we hear, Mr. Chair, from Mr. Tompkins?
Yes. For somebody who is intimately involved in this and who will be going forward, I just want to share with you my current experience. That my attitude is that we are like an at-will organization as it is now. And that when we take our operating plan and our strategic plan, we are regularly called, especially before the PHED committee, to review components of that plan now. If you take our federal engagement strategy, we've met once this year, we're meeting again in 6 weeks. We have met on workforce, and at any time, our organization does and is ready to meet with any committee to do updates on any component of the plan, including where we are overall. We report to the county executive twice a year in a more formal way. And so my feeling is that the mechanism is there in that we respond to the best of our ability, whenever you have a request to review any particular component of the plan. My only concern would be that the more prescriptive we are about dates and specific meetings, that we focus more on the process and not on getting the work done. And what I like about what we do now is when we get a phone call from any council member or the county executive who wants to learn or know more formally about any component of the strategy or the plan, then we do it. And that, I think that process is there. The accountability, we get nervous every time we come to our budget meetings because we want to make sure that we're delivering on what we said we would do. And so to a large extent, I think it is there, and that it's not something that we avoid. To Mr. Drummer's point, I am not going to be doing this to put it on a shelf. That is a waste of our time. And I know you didn't mean it this way, but I would be insulted if we didn't use the plan, because that's what we're here to do, to implement.
What we're here to do, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that all of the points, I think, have merged into a similar place. I think Councilmember Navarro's point is very well taken. In fact, if I recall, for her economic development platform, one of my responses was, "This is terrific. Now let's see if we hold ourselves to it." And she said, "I'm sure you're going to do your best to make sure we do," Councilmember Friezan, if I recall that meeting when we first talked about it. So I couldn't be more aligned with that. And again, I'll go back to the reservations. It's only as good as we keep them. I agree with you, Mr. Tompkins. You're not planning on doing this for the purpose of, presenting a report. I think it's one of the whole reasons why we're moving this responsibility over to you, so that you're part of this from the beginning, because you're going to be called upon to execute many aspects of the economic development plan as well. And I think you already do this in pieces. So to formalize it, to me, makes sense. I'd propose that we include something that says that, if it's okay with you, that you would report to the PHED committee annually on our progress on implementation, so that we would have something formal. I don't think we need to set a specific date. I don't think, I think it should be annually. I think we should allow up to the committee chair to determine the best timing and to work through that, so that we're not overly prescriptive. But I do think to memorialize the idea that we're not, that we're going to actually have a report, we're going to have a discussion, we're going to hold ourselves accountable to this, I think makes a lot of sense. I think it's a really good suggestion, and I think it reflects an interest in not repeating the mistakes of the past, where we've come up with really good ideas, things that were really well intended, and then we came up short, frankly, when it came to implementing them. We're trying to solve that here, and so I think, my sense would be that would help to do what is intended. I'd be very comfortable with that. I'm very supportive of it, without being overly prescriptive, so that we can actually, we don't want to be writing reports. We want to be executing economic development, but there's a balance of holding ourselves accountable to make sure, how do we judge ourselves and make sure that we're actually following through? Is that?
Mr. Chairman, can I make a suggestion? I certainly appreciate the direction of the conversation, and I'm supportive of notionally of making sure that this strategic plan is not one that just simply sits on a shelf or is referenced by annually every 2 years or 4 years, as the case may be. But to follow along Bill's point, we certainly are going to intend to embrace the strategy, and it'll be reflected in our work plan, which is approved by our board. And if, in order for us not to be overly prescriptive or to be held to difficult and burdensome reporting requirements, could we have language which states that as part of the organization's annual budget appropriation hearing within PHED, that we have a conversation about the execution of the strategic plan? Because in my mind, those go hand in hand. Our work plan, we expect, will be running in parallel with what has been adopted by the council and approved by the council through the economic strategy. And so that seems to be the opportune time for us to have that annualized review. Additionally, we will have every 2 years, as prescribed in the legislation, a update. And then every 4 years, we'll have the refresh. So, that way we can ensure that we have the council's input, but also to ensure that as part of the MCDC work plan, we have the strategy that's agreed to by the council top of mind as a priority in the work that we intend to do for that fiscal year.
All right. So you're suggesting that, first of all, as written, it requires, am I correct? It requires an annual report on the plan? Tell us.
That's not in there now. I was suggesting we could add that.
Okay.
But instead of an annual report, if we could have that as part of our annualized appropriations process before the PHED committee. And that way we'll ensure that the council will have a discussion about strategic plan, and also in doing so, the execution in which MCDC will be undertaking. And then I would suspect part of that conversation would also include ways in which we are bringing in external stakeholders to be able to align towards the strategic plan.
So you're saying that you'll present your work program in light of the strategic plan, in a sense. You will, and we'll talk about the two together.
Yes. So that way you have an annualized review, which I believe would meet the parameters of what the council members are suggesting what they would like to have.
Okay. I know Council Member Navarro had raised her hand.
I mean, the only thing I would suggest again is that because there are some other areas that are so critical, like transportation or workforce development, which are outside the PHED committee, I think that there should be a mechanism to do, fine if it's an annual check-in to see how we're moving along in those areas as well, which are major components of our economic development strategy for the county. So it seems to me that perhaps there should be a council presentation. Fine if it's done on an annual basis, just so that everybody can, I mean, I won't be here obviously after 2022, but I think that whoever is elected to the county council, whoever, is in the executive seat, obviously those people are going to change. And there should be a consistent mechanism through which the entire leadership owns this strategic plan and the execution of that strategy. So having some way of, hearing from Economic Development Corporation, how we're doing, et cetera, and a moment of reflection as well for everybody to understand how our decisions also are playing a role in the execution of that strategy to me, I think that is very important as a matter of really, seeing some actual results and understanding where we're headed. So that's the only observation I will make, is that I think that, transportation, workforce development, other areas are outside of PHED. Perhaps a council presentation of sorts would be critical. We used to do that in the past. I remember we would have robust council sessions where we would invite Mr. Fuller. We would talk about the regional indicators, the direction, where are we, et cetera. We haven't done that in a while. I think something like that is robust is important, because then we do a lot of work on a daily basis and a lot of decisions are made. Very rarely do we have an opportunity to step back and look at the big picture and see how we're doing. Generally speaking, I think this strategic plan provides a really awesome framework for us to also have a reaction to that. And so anyway,
Okay.
those are my 2 cents.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that having a annual discussion at the full council, or certainly a report to the full council, and if the council president wants to, put that on the agenda for a full discussion at the full council each year, I think we could encourage that. Obviously, we can't require EDC to present to the council because the council president controls scheduling, but we could certainly require a annual report.
We could require, we could absolutely require an annual report,
right? Which
I think to the council, which should not be predicated on the will of the president.
Right. So I think we're in agreement about that, and certainly I think a council president would possibly want to do this before the full body, because it's quite very interesting, and every council member is very interested in it. So I think that would be a positive step there.
So operationally, including language that says MCEDC will report to the council progress on implementation.
Well, I thought it was just more it's an every other year plan formulation. Is that right, Andrew?
Yes, effectively. Yeah.
So, I think I think on the biennial year, you might have, you're obviously going to have a report to the council with the biennial revision. And then I think, we could ask NCEDC to send an annual report on the county's progress on the plan. I don't know what they would say about things like the purple line or managed lanes. It would be an interesting question, but in any event, okay. I feel like we need to.
Chairman, at risk of belaboring this conversation, let me just offer 2 personal views and concerns that I would have. The first is that what we envision out of the strategic plan is a consensus document, the one in which everybody can embrace, so we can be clearly on board with the public sector and the private sector about the direction where we're headed, so that we have a clear narrative to the public about where we want to go. Engaging in some of these more divisive political questions is one that we hadn't anticipated on trying to conclude. We would leave those decisions to the elected officials, and we don't want to be put in a position where we're going to politicize this process, especially if it endangers the possibility that the consensus would be.
Yeah, and you can't provide a report card on the county council's work on this plan. That puts you in an impossible position
to judge anybody.
That's not what we're asking, Bill. Also, I'm sorry. That's not what we're asking.
The other question and concern is just
that's not what we're asking.
That's not what we're asking. I think that we would be naive to think that there isn't a nexus between the county's economic development strategy and the decisions that are made to further that. So again, that's why originally I said that the council should have a way to do a check-in to just understand, what decisions have we made, what decisions that the county executive has made, et cetera, to further these goals, and where we may still have some gaps, versus asking the Economic Development Corporation, Mr. Wu, I totally agree with you, to somehow come and say, oh, you should have made a different decision here or there. I mean, I never would even envision something like this, but I just think that absent that, feedback loop where we as elected officials get to also understand how we are, furthering the goals, then we're just going to have parallel tracks, which is why we have gotten to where we are right now, where there seems to be a disconnect. And very important point that you made, Mr. Wu, it will also change according to who's in leadership, right? And so just trying to figure out how to balance that would be really important. But anyhow, I unfortunately have to go, and maybe we'll, come up with something for full council. But I just feel like, I've been here for a long time. I think I'm the one who's been on the council the longest, and I've seen this conversation, go around in circles for a very long time under different administrations and different county council folks. And so seems to me that we're still missing this opportunity to reflect on how are we actually moving the needle on economic development. But, leave it to you guys who are the experts, and we'll see.
Well,
thank you for indulging me.
thank you for your participation.
And I would also just,
I think we have agreement about an annual report.
well, and Mr. Chairman, and that was the other second point that I wanted to just raise as a concern for the organization. We intend to place a priority on the strategic plan, and we'll be required to go through this exercise biannually. And if I'm just concerned about the impact of the organization's time to create an annual report.
Okay.
I mean, at least in the scope that we would have given the time and attention to the 2-year and 4-year exercises.
Fair point.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah, if I may, I think Council Member Navarro said it both from the beginning. Why wouldn't we be meeting with committees or others? Annual ongoing reviews and discussions are very meaningful, and they're two-way, which is very different from an annual report.
Okay.
And if I have to spend 2 or 3 weeks of the staff's time doing another formal report,
That's a fair point.
it's not going to be fun. But we will love meeting on a regular basis as often as you want for a two-way dialogue, which will include, by the way, documents and reports, because you can't always do it through discussion.
Absolutely.
So I would request that you provide as much flexibility as possible in terms of what is formalized, because as I said earlier, we are at will. You call us up and say, I want to go over this, we're there.
Bob?
Based on what I just heard, I was going to suggest some language, just saying the EDC must report to the council periodically on the implementation of the plan. Something.
I wrote down almost the exact same suggested language. So
moved. So moved.
Yeah, second,
All right.
moved, whatever. But yes, I think I was just going to
Definitely
say, as
without
I wrote that down, that I think we're like snatching conflict from the jaws of consensus. I think we all have the same goal here. We don't want to be mired in reports. We want to be focused on actually implementing. We want to make sure that we're actually holding ourselves accountable to getting this done. I think that accomplishes what we're trying to do. So let's go with that.
Jerome, you okay with that? Good. All right. Consensus.
Is that
Sounds good, Bob. What you just said.
what I just said? It's 3-0. Okay. So I have 2 amendments. I have that I would add, and then I have the change in the dates for the transition clause.
Correct. And then there's a final amendment which you outlined in your packet about consideration of racial equity, social justice, and environment and climate change. So let's turn to that. So Bob, we're on, you had suggested some language on page 3.
Yeah, 3 of the memo.
And
Just simply added in the list of, there's a list of contents of the plan and the bill. Must include metrics to assess the county and its partners' ability to address relevant economic development measures, including, and then just add
okay.
racial equity and social justice and environmental sustainability, including climate change.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I want to just observe here, obviously, this is not, we're not suggesting that MCEDC is devising the county's climate change agenda or policy. We're not we're not suggesting that you're devising our plan for racial equity and social justice. You're contemplating how those issues are impacted by the strategic plan, and ideally you're helping move the ball forward, in a way that fits in the plan. So, it seems worthy of consideration. Colleagues? Andrew?
Yeah, I was just maybe going to suggest you want to hear from MCDC
Sure.
on that in terms of the implementation of it. I think we all support the goal here.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We fully intend to reference those issues, and those issues are also part of our work plan as well. The notion to have a statutory requirement to address those issues, especially in areas in which we don't own, is potentially awkward for us to be able to dictate to other entities and organizations about how we should move forward. We also believe that because it's already consistent with the council-approved economic development platform, it's already stated in there. And so, and then with our intention to include it and reference it anyway, it seems like the statutory amendment to explicitly call those out is not necessary, especially since we have had previous discussions about other subject matters that also impact economic development in a way that we wouldn't control, operationally. Also, given the fact that, for some of these issues, there is still a lack of consensus within the county about how we move forward. It's a difficult opportunity for us to come in and address.
Can I make a friendly suggestion? I think the concern here that I'm hearing is the metrics associated with these items and whether the EDC is equipped to do that. I mean, it's not whether or not racial equity and social justice or environmental sustainability and climate should be a core consideration. It's whether or not, this would be listed where it is here in the, must include metrics aspect. So could I suggest, Bob, that we adopt similar language to what the economic development platform included? Which already is referenced here. We thought we already had handled this, but if the goal is to put it in the bill language and not for it to be referenced, and then in the platform language, I'm trying to pull that up right now. You give me 1 second.
It's on circle 7
or 7, yeah.
7 of the packet.
And just while you're looking for that, Councilmember Friedson, just to chime in, I think that we should include language, and we'll look at this language. It should be a part of the plan. And if the expertise isn't there, that would be something that we need to get the expertise on. And there are people that I can recommend, others can recommend, that do this work on, inclusive economic development, related to, small and businesses owned by people of color and women, for example, and just how that's a part of the economy. And so I think it should be embedded in. And if we're concerned about the how, I think that's something that, can be figured out. So, but give it back to Councilman Friedson. I know was still making a point.
Oh, one thought is to take it out of the metrics and put in a statement that kind of copies the platform. The desired outcomes of the strategic plan are, and then list those 4 outcomes. I mean, that is the platform. I think I think that's a good point. I think it's more an outcome than a metric. You're looking for,
Yeah, I think that is the concern. So I think we can work offline on the language and share it with committee members if that's, and with EDC to make sure there's a comfort level, and with Mr. Fletcher, since this was a request that came from the executive branch after the fact, after lots and lots and lots of conversations, which we appreciate. But that's along the lines, Bob, of what I was suggesting. So I think we can figure out exactly what it looks like, but I think those are overarching outcomes that we hope this accomplishes, as opposed to the number of job, kind of more specific metric-based items that were, really largely taken from the original economic development strategic plan. So I think having it in a separate item might make more sense and be more reflective of what the intent is here for everybody.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about what I think the intent, could be. I mean, it obviously is necessary for us to be intentional about how we are creating opportunity for all people. I mean, what's the point of doing economic development if you're not creating opportunity for everyone? I mean, that's why we're here. So I think it doesn't feel like it's far afield at all to, have it be a key outcome and to intentionally talk about how some components of the plan achieve those goals.
Yeah,
and I think the same goes for, sustainability. I mean, I don't think that this plan needs to carry the load of how we make our climate more energy neutral, carbon neutral. But I think it should talk about supporting the growth of, clean energy sectors and, things like that. So I guess I don't know. We have to overthink what it may not be as challenging to fit this into, the core of the plan.
Yeah, I don't think we are overthinking it. I mean, I agree exactly with what you're saying. The focus of this is to do economic development. It should take into consideration our broader environmental sustainability and climate and racial equity and social justice goals. I think that it was included in the economic development platform, which is why we didn't include it here. We thought we had it covered. There's an interest in belts and suspenders, which, that's fine.
We love belts and suspenders at the county council.
Yeah, we do that a lot. So I think if we take it out of the metrics piece and include language similar to the desired outcomes, and a thriving, diversified economy, racial equity and social justice, greater innovation, and environmental sustainability, including climate. I think that satisfies everybody's interest here.
Yeah, I would just do a separate paragraph for outcomes, the desired outcomes, and then put it there, just like it is similar to the way it is in the platform, economic development platform. I think it's more of like, where you want to end up. I think it's very relevant to, where you want what you want the plan to accomplish. And so that would be my suggestion.
Okay with that? Take it out of the metrics piece and just have to.
Yeah, because then as an outcome, then
cherry pick the same language that's already in the economic development plan just to make sure it's front and center. But,
yeah, I'm going to put it in a separate paragraph there.
And then you get programs that are aligning to that objective. Does that work? Comments on this from all considered?
sounds good to me.
All right, thumbs up all around.
Okay, so I've got 3 amendments now, and is that it? I think
that's it.
So I'm assuming then that the bill is reported favorably 3-0 with amendments.
3-0 with amendments. I'm seeing no one disagreeing with that idea. 3-0 with amendments.
I will send each of the committee members, and I'll send it to Jerome too, and Ben, the revised bill so they can see the language in case anybody has any questions or problems with it, the way it's drafted. And I'll send it to you hopefully by the end of the day.
Okay,
Got to work on a public health order as well.
good. Back to our economic development. Okay.
Okay. Well,
All right.
Okay. Thank
We
you.
have a committee recommendation. Thank you to everyone. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Executive Branch and MCEDC.
Thank you.
We have a second item. Hello, Linda.
Hello. You have before you today an executive regulation related to the bill that requires air conditioning starting June 1st. And DHCA would appreciate if we're able to get this in place before June 1st. So we had an opportunity to bring it to the committee today, which is why it kind of came on at the last minute. But I think that you'll find it reflects, the provisions of the law. But in the regulations, I just would note for you that there are requirements around reasonable repair and maintenance, which are a little more specific and talk about having servicing done between October and May, which would, of course, reduce problems in the months when air conditioning is going to be working, but also requirements around timeframes should there be problems with air conditioning or should the department find that air conditioning doesn't exist. I would let the department make any comments to you. I'm recommending approval as transmitted. It seemed to be in order with the law and with the expectations of the program.
Great. Director Nagam.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. So these regulations are pretty much straightforward. So based on the law that went into effect last year, one of the things that we had to address was to see or to make our landlords aware how the repairs and maintenance would be looked at for the air conditioning, and that's what these regulations basically refer to. This is not to say that the department was not addressing these issues before, prior to the bill or the law, becoming the law. So, but this basically formalizes what we look for or what we are going to look for in terms of repairs and maintenance. And also, one of the things, maybe this is a silver lining during the pandemic, it also made us aware of especially during the pandemic situation when the supplies are limited, then how do we, make sure that we are being flexible at the same time providing a good service to our constituents. So as Linda mentioned, these regulations also provide certain scenarios in terms of the flexibility that the department could provide and what to expect. So we did do outreach regarding this bill when it was passed last year and before it became law. We are trying to do an outreach again with our landlords. And we are also hoping that once window guards bill becomes law on December 31st, maybe we can do a webinar for our landlords and go over AC bill and also the window guards bill at the same time. So we'll continue to work towards our marketing and outreach with our landlords. I have Chris and Dan from my office, so they can jump in if they have to say anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Chris and Dan. So just to begin 30,000 feet here, this is the draft regulation that you have prepared through the process that you've gone, which has included close consultation with tenants and property owners. Is that correct?
I'm going to have Chris and Dan chime in as well. So we did just, look at with the county attorney's office and probably some of the. Hello. Yeah, Chris, go ahead, please.
We have a French language speaker joining us. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I would. Go ahead. Great, Chris. I'm sorry. Yes, I would say that this is very much informed by interactions with tenants and with landlords over the last. Well, really, what you'll see is this regulation really formalizes what DHCA has been doing in the past, but we took the opportunity after the law was passed during the last summer to interact with the tenants and landlords and see sort of what would go into formalizing this process. Did the process that we used in the past, was it accurate? Did it work? Were the timeframes realistic? How do we handle various scenarios when there's a difficulty getting a part or something like that? And so we developed what we think were realistic timeframes for allowing a landlord to demonstrate that they're making a good faith effort to improve to repair the air conditioning. And then we put that into the final regulatory form, and that's what you see before you.
Okay. I mean, I guess the reason why I'm asking is I want to make sure you've gone through the process and stakeholders have had a chance to, comment. So that if we approve it, then it's done, Linda, or?
So all the regulations also have to be advertised in the register. Right. This was advertised in the register and there were no comments received from that formal process. But I think what you're hearing the department say is that they've been in consultation with representatives over the course of developing this.
Right.
So there has been opportunity. There has been opportunity for comment.
Right. No comments is not a sign of no outreach. It's just a sign that you got it right.
And just to emphasize, I think what was said before, which is, of course, for buildings that had air conditioning, DHCA has been enforcing the good operation of that air conditioning always, if they had air conditioning. But of course, now the bill requires air conditioning and also has some specifics around what that temperature would be. So the bill makes the requirements around air conditioning a little different, but when a building had air conditioning, DHCA would always enforce if that was provided as a part of the lease, would always enforce if there were problems with the air conditioning.
Okay.
I just add, I think they struck a good balance here, and my son agrees too in the background. But I think the 5 days and, I've also heard from the community that you did do some outreach, which is great. So this was not we took a lot of time on this in committee, and so I appreciate the work that went into the regulations. So thank you.
Super. Okay, well, Chris and Dan, thanks for being here today. Dirk and Gav, thank you. And
and actually, I also have Keen from my office. I've neglected to recognize him.
Keith, thank you. Oh, he's on. I guess his camera isn't allowed.
Yeah.
There it is. Hi.
Yes. Nice to see you again.
Likewise.
Very good.
Thank you for your guys' good work.
All right. Okay. Well, we don't need to belabor it because this is a good proposal and we're all together on it. So thank you very much for the work that went into it. Really appreciate it. And
Say hi. So I like AC.
Hi.
The cool young fella there. All right. Without objection. Okay, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Take care.
Information. Please call the Transit Information Center at 240